Just want to take a few minutes this morning in the time that we've got left. I'm going to read from the book of Matthew and the second chapter in just a moment, from Matthew chapter 2. We focus our attention this time of the year upon Mary and Jesus, rightfully so. But I think sometimes we forget about Joseph and what his position was. Joseph was a godly man. He was probably the spiritual maturity of a David, of a Moses. I mean, he was a godly man. And if Judah would not have sinned, if you follow it through in the book of Matthew in the first chapter, he probably would have been king of Judah. I mean, he was in David's line, and so he was set to be king. So he was not just an afterthought or somebody that came along for the ride, but God had a purpose in what he was doing in Joseph's life. But I want us for just a couple of minutes this morning, and we'll not use the outline or anything like that. I just want to talk about a few things today from Matthew chapter 2. I want us to look at the negative side of Christmas. I don't like negativity. It's like fingers on a chalkboard to me. But we read it in the life of Herod in Matthew chapter 2. Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who is to be born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all of Jerusalem with him. Now it was Herod, it was Augustus Caesar that gave him the title of king, and so he's very proud of that title. And verse 4 says, And when he had gathered all the chief priests and scribes of the people together, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. So they said to him, In Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet, But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, yet are you not the least among the rulers of Judah? For out of you shall come a ruler who will be shepherd my people Israel. Then Herod, when he had secretly called the wise men, determined from them what time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, Go and search out carefully for the young child, and when ye have found him, bring back word to me, that I may come and worship him also. That's not what his intent was. And when they heard the king, they departed, and behold, the star which they had seen in the east went before them, till it came and stood over where the young child was. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceedingly great joy. And when they had come to the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented to him gifts, gold, and frankincense, and myrrh. Let me just stop there for just a moment. When the wise men came to Herod, he asked them when they saw the star. They didn't give a time when it was, but Herod said, let's kill all the boys 2 years and younger. So most likely the star appeared to them 2 years before as they made their journey. Now we don't know how old Jesus was at this time. We know he was not in the tower, the flock. We know he was now in a home in Bethlehem. Now think with me a moment. All the people had gathered for the census, and some of them were starting to depart. They were not going to stay where Jesus had been born a long time, so they went into a home that was in Bethlehem. That was not their home. They were from Nazareth, so they were there for a little time, and they had word to leave because of Herod. Now Herod, history tells us, Herod died in March 13th, 4 BC. So Jesus was born a few months before that. So Jesus was he was a young child, was not a babe, but most likely an infant. So he and his family went to Egypt. But before they did, here were the wise men that came. We have no idea how many wise men. We know there were 3 gifts, and from that we talk about 3 wise men. Very likely was a caravan that was there. But they came and offered him gifts of gold that was a picture of the deity and the glory of Jesus Christ, of frankincense that was a perfume that dealt with the fragrance of life, that would deal with his perfection. And then they gave him myrrh, that with the bitter herbs that would very well speak of the suffering that he would endure. Verse 12 says, And then being divinely warned in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed from their own country another way. When they had departed, Behold, the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, Arise and take the young child and his mother and flee to Egypt and stay there until I bring you word, for Herod will seek the young child to destroy him. When he arose, they took the young child and his mother by night and departed for Egypt, and was there until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the Lord through the prophet, saying, Out of Egypt I have called my son. Then Herod, when he saw that he was deceived by the wise men, was exceedingly angry, and sent forth and put to death all the male children who in Bethlehem and in all of its districts from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had determined from the wise men. Then was fulfilled which was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet, saying, A voice was heard in Ramah, lamentations and weeping and great mourning. Rachel, weeping for her children, refused to be comforted because they were no more. A couple thousand years before that, there was about 1,800 years before that, there was Jacob and Rachel in the same area. Rachel gave birth and died in childbirth, and Jeremiah gave the prophecy. And now we see it fulfilled. Rachel weeping over her children. She gave birth, the beginning of all that was to take place. And now she's weeping over her children, those that died at this great tragedy. Now in verse 19, when Herod was dead, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, Arise, take the young child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who sought the young child's life are dead. Then he rose, took the young child and his mother, came into the land of Israel, most likely going back to Bethlehem, because not concerned about the gossip that might take place up in Nazareth. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judah instead of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there, because Archelaus was a lot worse even than Herod. And being warned by God in a dream, he turned aside into the region of Galilee, and came and dwelt in the city called Nazareth, which that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophet, He shall be called a Nazarene. So you have the story from the side of Herod and all of his wickedness and all of his sin. I want you to think for a moment as we just think about the scene in which Jesus was born. History tells us that Herod had 10 wives, and he had them all killed. And Marianne was the first wife, and her children were the ones. Their son was the one that was expected to be the next king, the follower of Herod. Antipater was the one that was in line, and he was afraid of his brothers, and so he had them killed and had 2 stepbrothers killed and thought that he was next in line. But Herod grew weary of Antipater and had him killed, and when Caesar Augustus signed the decree to say that Antipater was to be killed, Augustus remarked, I would rather be Herod's pig than Herod's son. And that's how wicked Herod was. The only answer to Herod's wickedness was the sin that was in his heart and his life, because he refused to believe just exactly who God was and who the Savior was. And he was interested in his own way of life, interested that he might continue, that then his line might continue and might be king. But that was the wickedness of Herod. And into that scene came Jesus Christ, the Son of God. 33 years later, there was the great showdown that took place in the streets of Jerusalem. On one side were the soldiers of Rome with their swords and their shields and their spear, and the other side was the Savior. On the side with the soldiers were the Sanhedrin and the aristocracy of all the Jewish people, and there was Jesus standing alone. And you can almost hear the voices today. Take down the body from the cross. Put him on the cross, then take him down. Bury him. Put the stone over the tomb, and there'd be no exit, there'd be no way out. You can almost hear the voices saying, we won, we are victorious, and we are the winners because of what we've done. But 2,000 years later, they're gone. The Sanhedrin is gone. The ruling class of Israel is gone, but the truth of Jesus still stands. We think about the problems that take place in the world today. Think about the tragedy at Sandy Hook the other day, with grade school children, 5 and 6 year old children, 6 and 7 year old children that were that were killed. How can that happen? How can that take place? How people have asked, how can God allow such a thing to happen? Somebody said, if there's a God, how could God allow something to happen? And there have been all kinds of answers, and there are all kinds of statements that have been made. But I think you could sum it up very quickly in Romans chapter 1. Simply says in the first chapter of Romans, for since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes were clearly seen, talking about God, being understood by the things that are made, even the eternal power and the Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but because they became futile in their own thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened, professing themselves they became wise. Professing themselves became wise, they became as fools. And they changed the glory of God, the incorruptible God, into the image of man. And therefore, because of all this, God gave them up. He says in verse 26, for this reason, God gave them up to vile passion. In verse 28, God gave them up to a reprobate or to a debased mind. The reason we've got all that takes 2 hours after that took place in Connecticut, a man did some attacking at children with knives in China. We've seen it happen in Oregon just several days before that. Not to say nothing of Columbine and so forth. Why? Because man has been left to himself. And that's what sin does. Man left to himself without God. That's the purpose of Christmas, to remember that Jesus Christ came. And if we would have Jesus Christ into our heart, if Jesus Christ would enter the lives of every individual, you'd not have catastrophes like that because Jesus would reign. That's the answer. And that's the hope that we have in him. Somebody said, where was God when those little children were mowed down? He's right there with them. Right with them. And he will be with the parents if they invite him in. And he'll be with anyone if we invite him in. We invite him in through the person of Jesus Christ. That's our hope today. And that's our prayer. Let's bow our heads this morning. And would you look into your own heart? Do you know Jesus Christ? If you would slip out into eternity today, do you know for certain that you'd go to heaven? Christmas season, no greater time than to put your faith and trust in him today.